The observation deck of Station Eternal floated high above the dying world. Through the curved glass windows, the planet Tizen 4 looked like a wounded eye. Brown clouds covered most of its surface. Orange fires burned where volcanoes had torn through the crust. The blue oceans that once covered 70% of the world were now gray with ash and debris. Ambassador Kira Vasquez stood with her hands clasped behind her back. She was 43 years old, with silver streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of difficult negotiations. She had represented humanity in dozens of first-contact situations. She had faced pirates, warlords, and alien minds so strange that communication seemed impossible. But nothing had prepared her for this. Behind her, the 7 witnesses sat in their ancient chairs. These beings represented the founding species of the Galactic Concord, a civilization that had governed this part of the galaxy for 12,000 years. They were all beyond human understanding. Their bodies had been modified and rebuilt so many times that they barely resembled their original forms. High Witness Yomari, the eldest among them, was a creature of flowing bioluminescent tissue and delicate sensor frills. She had watched stars die. She had seen empires rise and fall like waves on a beach. The asteroid struck their largest ocean 47 standard days ago, Yomari said. Her voice was soft and musical, translated through devices implanted in Kira's ear. The impact triggered a cascade of seismic events, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions. The atmospheric debris has blocked 78% of their sunlight. Surface temperatures have dropped by 32 degrees. Kira did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the planet below. How many survivors? Approximately 3 billion remain alive. The number decreases by roughly 2 million each day. At current projections, the species will be functionally extinct within 120 days. 3 billion people. Kira tried to imagine it. 3 billion thinking, feeling beings. Parents and children. Artists and farmers. Lovers and dreamers. All of them huddled in the ruins of their civilization, watching the sky grow darker, wondering why the warmth would not return. The Dasani are a gentle people, another witness added. This one was called Morvith, a being of crystalline structures and magnetic fields. They developed agriculture, literature, mathematics. They were perhaps 300 years away from achieving space travel. They would have made excellent additions to the Concord. Would have, Kira repeated. The words tasted bitter. Yes. Yomari's frills pulsed with colors that Kira's translator identified as sorrow mixed with acceptance. But nature has rendered its judgment. Their evolutionary path ends here. This is the way of things. Kira finally turned to face the witnesses. The observation deck was designed to intimidate visitors. The witnesses sat high above the floor on platforms of living metal. Their ancient eyes looked down at her like judges examining a criminal. The other candidate species stood in their own sections of the room. The Vreth, tall insectoid beings with clicking mandibles. The Elorian, creatures of flowing quicksilver. The Harthan, massive beings that looked like walking mountains. All of them watched Kira with curiosity. You could save them, Kira said. The Concord has the technology. Atmospheric processors. Orbital mirrors to redirect sunlight. Food synthesizers. Medical technology. You could save every single one of them. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. The Vreth ambassador made a sound that the translator identified as shock. The Elorian rippled with what might have been nervous laughter. Even the Harthan, who rarely showed emotion, shifted their massive bulk uncomfortably high. Witness Yomari leaned forward. Her ancient eyes studied Kira with something that might have been pity. Child, she said softly, you do not understand. To interfere would be sacrilege of the highest order. We observe. We remember. We do not choose who lives and who dies. That is nature's domain alone. I do not understand, Kira agreed. Explain it to me. Yelmari's frills shifted through a complex pattern of colors. The universe is old. Older than your species can imagine. In all that time, one truth has remained constant. Life is fragile. Or death is certain. The strong survive. The weak perish. This is not cruelty. This is simply the mechanism by which the universe improves itself. Each extinction makes room for something new. Each death feeds new life. To interfere with this process is to declare yourself wiser than the cosmos itself. And no one is that wise, Morgoth added. Not even us. Especially not us. Kira looked at each of the witnesses in turn. She saw beings who had lived for thousands of years. Beings who had watched countless civilizations rise and fall. Beings who had convinced themselves that doing nothing was the same as doing right. So when disaster strikes, Kira said slowly, you just watch. You record. You remember. But you never help. We honor the fallen by preserving their memory, Yelmari said. We have libraries containing the complete histories of over 40,000 extinct species. Their art, their music, their philosophy, their DNA. They live on in our archives, even as their bodies return to the cosmic cycle. But they are still dead. Yes, as we all will be, eventually. Even the Concord will fall someday. Even the stars will die. This is the way of things, and we have made peace with it. Kira thought about the Vasani families huddled in the ruins below. She thought about parents holding children, promising them that everything would be okay while knowing it was a lie. She thought about elders singing songs that would soon be forgotten, telling stories that would never be passed on. Humanity's application for Concord membership, she said. This is our test, is it not? You want to see if we can accept your philosophy. Yelmari inclined her head. You are perceptive. Yes. Every species that joins the Concord must demonstrate that they understand the fundamental truth of existence. Nature selects. We observe. This is the price of admission to galactic civilization. Kira looked back at the dying world. 3 billion souls, waiting for help that would never come. The Concord had the power to save them all, and they would do nothing. They would watch and record and remember, and they would call it wisdom. How long do I have to make my decision? Kira asked. The observation period will last 30 standard days. At the end of that time, you will either affirm humanity's acceptance of our principles, or you will reject them. If you reject them, humanity will be barred from the Concord permanently. You will be confined to your home system. You will never spread among the stars. Kira nodded slowly. 30 days. 120 days until the Dasani were extinct. The math was not complicated. I understand, she said. I will need time to consider, of course. Yelmari settled back into her chair. We have assigned you quarters on the station. You may observe the events below for as long as you wish. Perhaps watching will help you find acceptance. Kira turned and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the vast chamber. The other candidate species watched her go. The Vreth clicked their mandibles in something like sympathy. The Elorian rippled with colors of gentle sadness. None of them doubted what her answer would eventually be. All species eventually learned to accept the truth. It was simply a matter of time that they were wrong. The quarters they gave Kira were beautiful. The walls were made of some kind of living crystal that shifted colors with her mood. The bed adjusted itself to her body. The food synthesizer could produce any meal she requested. A massive window looked down at Thiessen 4, so she could watch the extinction in comfort. She hated every inch of it. For 3 days, Kira did not sleep. She sat at the window and watched the planet below. Her tablet computer showed her the feeds from Concorde observation drones that circled the dying world. The drones recorded everything. Every collapsed building. Every flooded city. Every mass grave. The Dasani were amphibian beings. They had smooth blue-green skin and 3 large eyes that could see in almost complete darkness. Their hands had 6 fingers each, and they used them to create beautiful works of art. Before the asteroid, they had lived in great cities along the coastlines of their world. They had built towers of coral and shell that reached toward the sky. They had developed music that could only be heard underwater, complex songs that carried for hundreds of miles through the deep dot. Now their towers were rubble. Their songs were silent. Their children were dying. On the 4th day, Ambassador Vreth Prime came to visit her. The Vreth were insectoid beings, tall and thin with segmented bodies and large compound eyes. Their species had joined the Concorde 8,000 years ago. They had learned its lessons well. "You have not eaten," Vreth Prime observed. His translator gave his voice a clicking, mechanical quality. "This is not healthy behavior. I am not hungry." Vreth Prime settled his long body into a chair designed for beings of his shape. His compound eyes reflected the dying world outside the window. "You are struggling with acceptance," he said. It was not a question. This is normal. All young species struggle at first. We Vreth certainly did. How did you learn to accept it? Kira asked. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the planet below. "Time," Vreth Prime said. "And understanding. When my species first encountered the Concorde, we were horrified by their philosophy. We thought them monsters. How could anyone watch innocents die and do nothing? It seemed impossible that advanced beings could be so cruel. And now? Now I understand that they are not cruel. They are wise. The universe is vast and cold and indifferent. Entropy always wins in the end. To fight against this truth is to exhaust yourself in a battle you can never win. The Concorde has survived for 12,000 years because they learned to conserve their strength. They do not waste resources on the dying. They focus on preserving those who can survive." Kira finally turned to look at him. "The Dasani could survive. With help, they could survive. The Concorde has the technology to save them." "The Concorde could save them today," Vreth Prime agreed. "But what about tomorrow? What about the next asteroid? The next plague? The next disaster? The universe is full of ways to kill. If the Concorde saved every species that faced extinction, they would exhaust themselves within a single millennium. They would become servants to entropy instead of observers of it. So they pick and choose. They decide who lives and who dies." "No." Vreth Prime made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That is precisely what they do not do. They let nature choose. They remove themselves from the equation entirely. No bias, no favoritism, just the cold logic of survival. Those who can save themselves deserve to survive. Those who cannot were never meant to." Kira thought about human history. She thought about the Black Death, which had killed a third of Europe. She thought about the 1918 flu, which had killed millions. She thought about the climate disasters of the 21st century, the nuclear close calls, the asteroid that had nearly destroyed them in 2157. Humanity had survived all of these things, but not through acceptance, not by letting nature choose. "We splinted broken bones," Kira said softly. Vreth Prime tilted his head. "I do not understand. In the early days, before we were even human, really, when our ancestors were still living in caves and hunting with rocks, when someone broke their leg, they should have died. They could not run. They could not hunt. Nature had chosen them for death." Kira paused. "But we did not let them die. We wrapped their broken bones in bark and vine. We carried them. We fed them. We kept them alive until they healed. An inefficient use of resources? Maybe. But those people we saved, they remembered. They taught their children to save others. They built a culture where helping the weak was not weakness, but strength. That culture eventually built cities, built ships, built the technology that let us reach the stars. Vreth Prime was silent for a long moment. His compound eyes reflected the dying world outside. "Your species is young," he said finally. "You still carry the delusion that you can fight entropy itself. In time, you will learn. You will see that acceptance is the only path to peace." "Maybe," Kira said. "Or maybe you will learn something from us." After Vreth Prime left, Kira opened a secure communication channel. The signal bounced through a series of relay stations hidden in the asteroid belt near Earth. It was supposed to be untraceable, but she knew the Concord was probably monitoring it anyway. She did not care. The face that appeared on her screen was weathered and gray. Admiral James Chun had commanded the United Earth Fleet for 20 years. He had fought pirates and protected colonies and negotiated treaties. He was the most practical, hard-headed person Kira knew. "Ambassador," he said, "I have been watching the feeds. I assume you are not calling to accept their terms." "No." Kira took a deep breath. "Admiral, I need you to do something that will probably get us all killed." Chen's expression did not change. "I am listening. How many ships can you gather without alerting the Concord?" "A dozen, maybe." "Freighters, mostly. A few medical vessels. Nothing with real weapons." "I do not need weapons. I need cargo space. I need atmospheric processors. I need food synthesizers and water purifiers and medical supplies. I need everything we can spare." Chun was silent for a long moment. "You want to save the Visani?" "Yes. The Concord will never allow it. They will destroy our fleet. They might destroy Earth. You are talking about ending humanity's future among the stars." Kira looked out at the dying planet. She thought about the Visani children huddled in the darkness, waiting for a sun that would never warm them again. "Admiral," she said, "if this is what the stars require of us, then I am not sure the stars are worth having." Chun nodded slowly. A small smile crossed his weathered face. "I will have the fleet ready in 6 days," he said. "Try not to start a war before we get there." The channel closed. Kira sat alone in her beautiful quarters, looking down at the world she had just decided to save. She did not know if she was being brave or foolish. She did not know if humanity would survive her choice. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She could not watch 3 billion people die and call it wisdom. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at dawn. 12 ships appeared in the space above Thesan 4 like stars blinking into existence. They were not warships. They were not impressive. Most of them were old freighters with patched hulls and engines that wheezed with age. A few were medical vessels painted white with red crosses. One was an atmospheric processor, a massive ugly thing that looked like a floating factory. They were the most beautiful sight Kira had ever seen. She stood on the bridge of the lead ship, the U.S. Hope, as it oriented itself toward the dying planet. Captain Sarah Okonjo stood beside her, barking orders to her crew. The Hope was a converted cargo hauler, never designed for delicate planetary operations. But her crew had practiced the insertion maneuvers for 6 straight days. "They were ready, Ambassador." The communication officer turned from her station. "We are receiving a transmission from Station Eternal. Eyewitness Yelmari is demanding to speak with you." "Put her through." The main view screen flickered, and Yelmari's face appeared. Her bioluminescent frills were blazing with colors that Kira's translator could not identify. Shock, perhaps? Or rage? Or something that had no name in any human language. Ambassador Vasquez. Yalmari's musical voice had become sharp and cold. What is the meaning of this? You were explicitly told that interference with natural selection is forbidden. You were told the consequences of defiance. I heard you, Kira said calmly. Allow nature to choose. But here's the thing about humans. High Witness. We have never been very good at allowing anything. You will be destroyed. Your ships, your planet, your entire species will be erased from the galaxy. Is that what you want? Kira looked at the planet on the view screen. Through the gaps in the ash clouds, she could see the ruins of Dasani cities. She could see the frozen coastlines where millions had died. She could see the darkness spreading across a world that should have been full of life. What I want, she said slowly, is to save 3 billion people who did nothing wrong except exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. If that costs us everything, then so be it. But I will not stand by and watch them die so that I can join your club. Yelmari's frills pulsed rapidly. You do not understand what you are doing. You are not just breaking our laws. You are challenging the fundamental truth of existence itself. Nature selects. This is not philosophy. This is physics. This is reality. Then reality is wrong. Kira turned to Captain Okanjo. Begin descent. The fleet dropped toward Thesan 4. The atmospheric processor led the way, its massive engines burning bright against the darkness. Behind it came the freighters and medical ships, each one carrying enough supplies to keep thousands of people alive. On Station Eternal, the witnesses gathered in their observation chamber. They had never seen anything like this. In 12,000 years of galactic history, no species had ever defied the fundamental principle of non-interference. It was unthinkable. It was impossible. And yet here were 12 tiny ships descending toward a dying world, carrying hope where there should have been none. Should we stop them? Morvith asked. His crystalline form flickered with uncertainty. We have the power. A single weapons platform could destroy their entire fleet. And prove what? Yalmari asked softly. She was watching the human ships with something that might have been fascination. That we are willing to kill to preserve our principle of not killing. The irony would be lost on no one. Then what do? We watch. We observe. We see what happens when a species refuses to accept the truth of existence. On the surface of Thesan 4, a young Dasani named Keth huddled in the ruins of what had once been a school. She was 12 years old. Her parents had died in the first tsunami. Her siblings had frozen to death 3 days ago. She was alone in the darkness, waiting to die. The temperature had dropped so low that ice was forming on her blue-green skin. Her 3 eyes could barely stay open. She had not eaten in 4 days. She had accepted that this was the end. She had made peace with it, the way her elders had taught her. Then she heard a sound. A roaring, thundering sound that shook the ground beneath her. She looked up and saw something impossible. Light. Bright, burning light, cutting through the ash clouds like a blade. A ship descended from the sky. It was unlike anything Keth had ever seen. Massive and ugly and beautiful all at once. It landed in the plaza outside the ruined school, and its sides opened like the petals of a flower. Figures emerged. They walked on 2 legs like the Dasani, but their skin was strange colors. Brown and pink and black. They wore thick suits that protected them from the cold. They carried boxes and bags and strange machines. One of them saw Keth huddled in the doorway of the school. The figure ran toward her. It was a human, though Keth did not know that word yet. A female human with dark skin and kind eyes. The human knelt beside Keth and said something in a language she did not understand. But the tone was universal. It was the tone of someone who wanted to help. The human pulled something from her bag. A blanket, thick and warm. She wrapped it around Keth's shivering body. Then she produced a container of something hot. Soup, Keth would later learn. Simple vegetable soup. The most delicious thing she had ever tasted. More humans were spreading out through the ruins. They were pulling survivors from collapsed buildings. They were setting up strange machines that began to pump warm air into the frozen streets. They were handing out food and water and medicine to anyone who needed it. Keth looked up at the human who had saved her. "Why?" she asked. Her translator was broken, but somehow the human understood. The human smiled. She pointed up at the sky, at the fleet of ships that were still descending through the clouds. "Because no one should die alone," she said. On Station Eternal, the witnesses watched in silence. The feeds from their observation drones showed scenes that defied everything they believed. Human engineers wading through irradiated floodwaters to repair Dasani power generators. Human doctors performing surgery in makeshift hospitals built from the ruins of temples. Human soldiers forming living chains to evacuate survivors from flooded districts. "They are going to die," Morvis said. "The radiation levels alone will kill most of them within months. They are sacrificing themselves for a species they have never met." "Yes," Yalmari agreed. Her voice was very quiet now. "They are. Why? It makes no evolutionary sense. They gain nothing from this. They lose everything." Yalmari did not answer. She was watching a human medic named Torres carry a Dasani child through the ruins. The child was unconscious. Torres was limping from a wound in his leg. But he kept walking. He kept carrying the child towards safety. "Perhaps," Yalmari said slowly, "we have been asking the wrong question. We have always asked why a species would sacrifice itself for another. Perhaps the right question is why we would not." The other witnesses stirred uncomfortably. This was dangerous thinking. This was heresy against 12,000 years of established truth. But none of them could look away from the screens. None of them could stop watching the impossible thing that humanity was doing. They were saving a dying world, and they were doing it simply because it needed to be done. 3 weeks passed. The humans did not stop working. The atmospheric processor had been positioned in orbit, where it worked day and night to clear the ash from the sky. Slowly, impossibly slowly, patches of blue began to appear through the gray. Sunlight touched the surface of Thesan 4 for the first time in months. Survivors emerged from their shelters and wept at the sight of it. On the ground, human engineers had repaired 17 power stations. They had restored clean water to 43 settlements. They had set up food production facilities that could feed millions. The death rate, which had been 2 million per day when the humans arrived, had dropped to less than 10,000. It was still too many. Every death was a tragedy. But it was no longer an extinction. The Witness Council convened an emergency session. The 7 ancient beings gathered in their chamber, their observation screens showing feeds from across the dying world. For the first time in millennia, they did not know what to do. "They have broken every law we hold sacred," Breath Prime said. The Insectoid ambassador had been invited to observe the proceedings. His compound eyes flickered with agitation. They must be punished. Their ships destroyed. Their species quarantined for all eternity. This is the only way to preserve the order of the Concord. And yet, Morvis said slowly, they are succeeding. The Dasani survival rate has climbed from 12% to 67%. By our own projections, at least 2 billion Dasani will survive the catastrophe. That is 2 billion thinking, feeling beings who would have died without human intervention. Irrelevant, Reth Prime insisted. The principle is what matters. If we allow this defiance to stand, every young species in the galaxy will believe they can challenge the natural order. The Concord will collapse into chaos. Perhaps, Eyewitness Yelmari said. She had been silent throughout the debate, watching the feeds with an expression that none of the others could read. Or perhaps the chaos is already here, and we have simply been too blind to see it. The other witnesses turned to look at her. Yelmari was the eldest among them. Her word carried weight that no other being in the galaxy could match. "What do you mean?" Morvith asked. Yelmari gestured at the screens. "Look at them. Really look. What do you see?" The witnesses looked. They saw human soldiers carrying wounded Dasani through the ruins. They saw human doctors working 20-hour shifts to treat radiation sickness. They saw human children drawing pictures to comfort orphans who could not understand their words. They saw human engineers teaching the Sani technicians how to maintain the equipment that was saving their world. "I see chaos," Breath Prime said. "I see a species that does not understand the natural order." "I see something else," Yelmari said. "I see a species that has survived. Think about it. Humanity is barely 1,000 years old as a spacefaring civilization. They have no natural weapons. They are not particularly strong or fast or intelligent. By every metric we use to judge evolutionary fitness, they should have gone extinct long ago. And yet they did not," Morvith observed. "No, they did not." Yalmari pulled up a holographic display of human history. They survived ice ages that killed 90% of their population. They survived plagues that should have wiped them out. They survived nuclear weapons and climate disasters and asteroid impacts. Again and again, they faced extinction. Again and again, they refused to die. "Luck," Reth Prime suggested. "Random chance." "No." Yalmari's frills blazed with sudden intensity. "Not luck. Look at the pattern. Every time they faced extinction, they survived because they helped each other. They carried the wounded. They shared their food. They taught their children to value cooperation over competition. Their entire evolutionary strategy is based on refusing to abandon their own." The chamber fell silent. The witnesses looked at the screens with new eyes. They saw not chaos but pattern, not defiance but purpose. "For 12,000 years, Yalmari continued, we have believed that nature selects for strength, for individual fitness, for the ability to survive alone. But what if we were wrong? What if nature has been selecting for something else entirely?" "What?" Morvith asked. "Compassion." Yalmari spoke the word like it was sacred. The willingness to sacrifice for others. The refusal to accept that suffering is inevitable. What if that is the trait that truly allows a species to survive in this cold and hostile universe? Reth Prime made a sound of disgust. "This is absurd. You are suggesting that our entire philosophy is wrong. That 12,000 years of Concord wisdom is based on a lie." "Not a lie," Yalmari said. "A mistake. We convinced ourselves that watching others die was wisdom. We told ourselves that doing nothing was the same as doing right. But it was never wisdom. It was fear. We were afraid to act because acting meant we might fail. We might make things worse. So we did nothing and called it philosophy." She turned to face the other witnesses. Her ancient eyes held something that none of them had seen before. Shame. "The humans are not wise," Yalmari said. "They are foolish and reckless, and they break every rule we hold sacred. But they are also brave. They looked at a dying world and said, 'Not today.' They knew they might fail. They knew they might die. They did it anyway. Because they are young," Reth Prime insisted. "Because they have not learned. Because they are right." Yalmari's voice cut through his objection like a blade. "They are right, and we have been wrong for 12,000 years. That is what I cannot stop thinking about. How many species have we watched die? How many civilizations have we allowed to end because we were too afraid to help?" The number appeared on the screens. 47,312. 47,000 species that the Concord had watched die without lifting a finger to save them. The witnesses stared at the number in silence. For the first time in millennia, they felt the weight of what they had done. What they had not done. What would you have us do? Morvith asked finally. We cannot undo the past. We cannot bring back the dead. No, Yelmari agreed. But we can change the future. We can look at what the humans are doing and ask ourselves a simple question. Is this wrong? She gestured at the screens. At the human medic who had not slept in 3 days, still working to save one more life. At the human engineer who had exposed herself to lethal radiation to repair a water treatment plant. At the human child who had given her only blanket to a Dasani orphan. Is this wrong? Yelmari repeated. Is this the chaos we should fear? Or is this the very thing we should have been doing all along? The witnesses did not answer. They could not answer, but for the first time in 12,000 years, they were asking the right questions. On the surface of Thesan 4, a young Dasani named Keth stood in the plaza where she had first been saved. The sky above her was still gray, but patches of blue were breaking through. The air was still cold, but she could feel warmth on her skin for the first time in months. Beside her stood the human woman, who had wrapped her in a blanket 3 weeks ago. Her name was Maria Torres. She was tired and sick from radiation exposure. But she was smiling. It is getting better, Keth said. Her translator was working now. The sky is getting better. Yes, Maria agreed. It will take time. Years maybe. But your world will heal. Why did you help us? Keth asked. It was the question she had been wanting to ask since the beginning. You did not know us. You owed us nothing. Why did you risk everything to save us? Maria was quiet for a long moment. She looked up at the sky, at the patches of blue breaking through the gray. Because we know what it is like to almost die, she said finally. We know what it is like to stand at the edge of extinction and wonder if anyone cares. And we decided a long time ago that if we ever had the power to save someone else, we would use it. No matter the cost. Keth did not fully understand, but she understood enough. She reached out and took Maria's hand. Thank you, she said. Maria squeezed her hand gently. You are welcome. Above them, the clouds continued to part. And somewhere in the heavens, the ancient witnesses of the Galactic Concord watched and wondered if everything they believed was wrong. 1 year had passed since the human fleet first descended through the ash clouds of Thesan 4. The world was still healing. The atmospheric processors had cleared most of the debris from the sky, but the climate would take decades to fully stabilize. The population had settled at 2.3 billion survivors. They were rebuilding their cities. They were replanting their forests. They were learning to sing their underwater songs again. Ambassador Kira Vasquez stood before the Witness Council for the second time. But everything was different now. The observation chamber had been redesigned. The elevated platforms were gone. The witnesses sat at the same level as their guests, arranged in a circle rather than a throne-like array. High Witness Yelmari had insisted on the changes. We are not judges, she had said. We are students now. Kira was not alone this time. Beside her stood Dasani in formal robes. Her name was Ambassador Dasani Prime, and she had been chosen by her people to represent them in galactic affairs. She was young by Dasani standards, barely 40 years old. But she had lived through the extinction event. She had been saved by human hands. She understood things that most of her elders never would. We have gathered here today to announce the results of the Council's deliberations, Yelmari said. Her bioluminescent frills pulsed with colors that the translators identified as solemnity and hope. For the past year, we have debated the actions of humanity. We have questioned our fundamental principles. We have examined 12,000 years of established wisdom. She paused. The chamber was silent. Representatives from dozens of species watched from the observation galleries. The Vreth, the Elorian, the Harthan, all of them waiting to see what the ancient Concord would decide. For 12 millennia, Yelmari continued, the Galactic Concord has operated on a simple principle. Nature selects. We observe. We do not interfere with the mechanisms of survival and extinction. We believed this was wisdom. We believed this was the only way to preserve order in a chaotic universe. She turned to look at Kira. Her ancient eyes held something that might have been gratitude. We were cowards, Yelmari said. We dressed our fear of action in the robes of philosophy. We watched billions die and called it enlightenment. We preserved their memories in our archives and told ourselves this was enough. It was never enough. It was never close to enough. A murmur ran through the observation galleries. The Vreth clicked their mandibles in shock. The Elorian rippled with confusion. This was not what anyone had expected. Humanity showed us another path, Yelmari said. They looked at a dying world and refused to accept that death was the only answer. They risked everything. They sacrificed their own people. They broke every law we held sacred. And they saved 2 billion lives. She stood. For the first time in millennia, a high witness rose to address a lesser species as an equal. The Concord does not merely accept humanity's membership, Yelmari announced. We ask humanity to teach us. Teach us to fight. Teach us to hope. Teach us to look at the dying universe and say, not while we still draw breath. Kira felt tears forming in her eyes. She had expected punishment. She had expected exile. She had not expected this. The old ways are ending, Yelmari continued. Today we announce the formation of a new doctrine. We call it the Dasani Protocol, in honor of the world that showed us how wrong we were. From this day forward, the Concord will no longer stand by while civilizations die. We will help. We will intervene. We will do what we should have been doing all along. Ambassador Dasani Prime stepped forward. Her 3 eyes glistened with moisture. My people would not exist without humanity's sacrifice, she said. Her voice was soft but steady. 2 billion of us are alive today because 12 ships full of strangers decided we were worth saving. We owe them a debt that can never be repaid. She turned to face Kira. Then, slowly and deliberately, she bowed. It was the deepest bow in the Sani culture, reserved for those who had saved a life. But we can try, she said. From this day forward, the Dasani pledge ourselves to the new doctrine. Wherever there is suffering, we will help. Wherever there is death, we will fight. We will carry the lesson humanity taught us to every corner of the galaxy. One by one, other ambassadors stepped forward. The Elorian representative, her liquid metal body shifting into a shape of reverence. The Harthan ambassador, his massive form bending low in respect. Even Vreth Prime, who had argued most loudly for humanity's punishment, clicked his mandibles in what his translator identified as humility. We were wrong, Vreth Prime said. We Vreth have followed the old ways for 8,000 years. We convinced ourselves that acceptance was wisdom. But watching your species, watching what you were willing to sacrifice for strangers, we began to question everything we believed. He paused. You showed us that there is another kind of strength. The strength to care. Yelmari raised her hands. The chamber fell silent. There will be those who resist this change, she said. There will be those who cling to the old ways. The transition will not be easy. But we have seen what is possible when a species refuses to accept that suffering is inevitable. We have seen worlds saved. We have seen hope restored. We have seen the universe become a little less cold. She turned to Kira one final time. Ambassador Vasquez, you were asked to choose between your principles and your people's future. You chose your principles. You risked everything to save strangers. Why? Kira thought about the question for a long moment. She thought about Maria Torres, who had died from radiation exposure 6 months ago. She thought about the other humans who had given their lives on Thesan 4. She thought about the long history of her species, the endless struggle against extinction. Because that is who we are, she said simply. Humanity has always been defined by a single trait. We refuse to give up. We refuse to accept that death is the end. We carry our wounded. We feed our hungry. We save our dying. Not because it is efficient. Not because it makes evolutionary sense. But because it is right. She looked around the chamber at the gathered ambassadors, at the ancient witnesses who were learning to see the universe with new eyes, at the Dasani representative who was alive because humans had refused to let her people die. You asked us to accept your philosophy, Kira said. To learn that suffering is natural and intervention is wrong. But we have a different philosophy. We believe that suffering is a problem to be solved. We believe that every life has value. We believe that the universe does not have to be cold and cruel if we refuse to let it be. She smiled. That is what we do. That is who we are. And now, if you're willing to learn, we will teach you to be the same. And now, if you are willing to learn, we will teach you to learn. We will teach you to be the same. The chamber erupted in sound. Applause and clicking and humming and a dozen other forms of celebration. The old order was ending. A new era was beginning. Outside the chamber, through the great windows of Station Eternal, the stars burned bright. Billions of worlds. Trillions of lives. All of them waiting for a galaxy that would finally learn to care. And it had started with 12 little ships, carrying hope to a dying world. Years later, historians would call this moment the Great Turning, the day the old philosophy died and a new doctrine was born. Some called it the human heresy. Others called it the Compassion Revolution. The Concord officially named it the Second Founding, but Dasani had their own name for it. They taught it to their children and their children's children, passing it down through generations as a sacred truth. They called it the day the universe learned to care. And in the centuries that followed, as the new Concord spread across the galaxy, saving worlds and preserving civilizations that would otherwise have died, they never forgot where the lesson had come from. They never forgot the 12 ships. They never forgot the humans who had looked at a dying world and said, "Not today." That they never forgot that sometimes. The greatest strength is not the power to destroy. It is the courage to save.